I gotcha. Oh my God. So great afternoon. Great afternoon. It is now 12:02. Welcome to 2025. I know we're already in it, but for us with Purchase Ready Academy, formerly known as Experts University, formerly known as, and those of us who have been gathering over the past few years on Thursdays, welcome to our reinvigorated Thursday training community. Today, our topic this month, Monique said, welcome back. Oh, glad to be back, Monique. I thought about you specifically. Today, this month, guys, our topic is going to be the updated contract documents, right? So today we're going to be talking about the buyer brokerage agreement. We know that there have been updates to that document. Next week, we're going to be talking about the compensation agreements, right, that the sellers are signing. The following week, we're going to be talking about the changes in the purchase and sale contract. And finally, in the fourth week, we're going to be talking about changes to the rider, right? So for those of you who are just hearing this conversation, what should be ringing in your head is, I can't miss a week because I didn't realize that there were 4 key parts to my contract documentation that I need to make sure that I'm aware of the changes, right? So I'm going to say that again because I had this discussion about 2 weeks ago in Palm Beach Gardens. In Palm Beach Gardens, I met some of you there. Della, I met there. In Palm Beach Gardens, I did the talk on specifically the buyer brokerage agreement. And one of the things that I wanted to make sure that the attendees understood was that with these changes to compensation, right? And how do we disclose compensation and how we document compensation, there are changes to not just the buyer brokerage agreement, there are changes to there are new documents that are created, such as the compensation agreements. There are changes to your contract, and then there is a new rider added. And so that should tell you, if I'm working with particularly a buyer, there are 4 parts to my documentation that I need to ensure I have in place. There are 4 parts to my documentation that should be in place concerning commission. Number 1, my buyer's brokerage agreement. Number 2, the compensation agreement, assuming the seller has agreed to provide some form of contribution to the buyer's agent's compensation. Number 3, the purchase contract. We need to make sure that that has the appropriate language in it. And then number 4, your rider. You need to make sure that you have the appropriate rider to tie in a bow what you've negotiated and the parties are agreeing to as it relates to buyer's compensation, okay? Buyer's agent compensation. So again, today we're specifically talking about the buyer brokerage agreement. Now, today's discussion is a little bit different than we have had in the past, but I'm going to show you that in just a second. For those of you, again, who I have not had a chance to meet before, it's a pleasure to meet you. But those of you who are familiar, you've been joining us on Thursdays for years now. Welcome back. Welcome to our updated conversation. The business has changed, so we have had to change. We've had to change our content, right? We have to change our conversation, and more importantly, I felt compelled to change the way in which I instruct and coach realtors. I got the question about what do I think the business is going to look like for realtors in the coming years. And so I have a couple of thoughts about that. One of my main thoughts is that it's going to be more and more important that you be a professional realtor. And when I say professional, meaning you're going to put time into learning your craft, right? And you're going to put time into really being able to understand and explain the concepts, the rules, and requirements of the business, right? So again, for those who I haven't had a chance to meet before, my name is Ray Cole Jackson. I'm a South Florida real estate attorney. A little bit about myself. Many of you know me as the founder and managing attorney of Title Experts. That is the brand and branch through which I service many realtors as a closing attorney. Hey, Gabby. A little bit about me personally. Good to see you. A little bit about me personally. I am originally from South Florida, Miami specifically. I did attend the University of Florida for undergrad, went on to attend the Santa Clara University School of Law, where I obtained my law degree. and my LLM from the University of Miami, right? So go Canes, thirdly. Now, my expertise, as you guys probably understand, or you probably can gather, is 360 degrees. I am a licensed real estate sales professional like all of you. Again, I am a real estate attorney. I operate a title company. I'm also a licensed loan originator. And so when it comes to discussions concerning real estate, I'm ready to have a 360-degree discussion. With that being said, that impacts and that influences how I teach and I coach realtors. I make sure that we don't just talk about one part without talking about the other parts that are tied and tethered to that, right? So we want to make sure that we are a real well-rounded 360-degree realtor. Been doing this for a long time. I was looking at some of the documentation from our talk at 2 weeks ago with the association at Avenir. They mentioned in the introduction that I've been developing curriculum for realtors since 2018, and teaching with the board since 2018, was named Realtor Educator of the Year in 2022. So it's been a while, but I'm still here. And I really enjoy it. For those of you who have been with me over the years, and those of you who are new, you're going to see some different conversation. Because there is a deeper focus to the brand and what we're doing. And so our brand purchase ready. We're going to talk more about that later on, but just to give you guys oversight, our brand is purchase ready. And the reason why we've pivoted to a brand of purchase ready is because of what's going on in the industry. We see that there is a huge need for buyers and sellers to really understand what it takes to make a real estate investment, to complete a real estate investment, right? And so not only that, we see that there is a need for, as a real estate professional, as a loan officer, as a title agent, just being in this space and talking to hopeful investors and first-time home buyers, I see that people just really don't know. They just really don't know what it takes to make a real estate purchase. And so hence purchase ready. And so under purchase ready, as an entity, and I'll give you guys a heads up, that is a non-for-profit that's launching. So you guys heard it first. That is a non-for-profit that's launching. Now I'm going to tell you guys from that, for us to hit our goal of 1,000 homeowners per year, we need your help, right? We can't do it alone. And so with Purchase Ready is our realtors. You guys are boots on the ground. I work with you guys every day. And so, of course, if we expect you to help, then we have to show you how to help. And that's where Purchase Ready Academy comes in. Now, the content, again, that is presented through Purchase Ready Academy is, of course, influenced by the lending team, the real estate team, and then, of course, the settlement services, which is title, insurance, and closing, right? So more about that later, but just wanted to give you guys a sneak peek into what is Purchase Ready? I keep saying it, Raycole. What is that about? Well, that's what it's about. It is time that we make a very concerted and organized effort to educate consumers on how to become purchase ready, right? That's our North Star, right? So getting into our discussion today, navigating the buyer brokerage agreement. For those of you that are just coming in, check the chat. There is a handout for today's discussion. The objective of our discussion today is to make sure that as realtors, you understand the changes to buyer representation as it relates to the NAR settlement, right? Who, by a show of hands in the chat, are just completely lost as to what happened with NAR? Anybody at this point? Anybody? Nobody. Great. So we can move forward. The main objective for today, since we all know how we got here, right? I want to make sure that you guys are very clear on your inventory of buyer brokerage agreements in Florida. Make sure that you're very clear on your inventory of buyer brokerage agreements in Florida. Now, many of you have probably taken trainings where you've gone over the exclusive buyer's brokerage agreement, the full one, and we have that in your handout. Some of you might have gone over the showing agreement and the property pre-touring agreement, but there are more agreements. There are more agreements. And so the purpose of today's discussion is to make sure that you have a high level understanding of your agreements, number one. Number two, make sure that by virtue of that handout, you guys need to make sure that you print that handout if you do not already have these 7 agreements printed out and available to you, because every buyer may not be interested in you being their agent until they find a property. Maybe they just want to see that one property they saw on Zillow or Redfin, where there's an agreement for that, if you choose to service them in that manner. I find that some agents are not even aware that they have options. And so the purpose of today's discussion is to make sure that you understand that you have options as to what type of buyer representation you're going to engage in, right? And then lastly, how are you going to confidently present these agreements to a buyer, right? How are you going to confidently present them to a buyer? So why does this matter? You have to have a clear understanding of the shift in compensation norms, right? There's a serious shift. One of the first shifts that you must understand, and I don't want to assume that anyone is more experienced than the other or that you understand this, because we have a wide range of professionals in the room with us, right? One of the first understandings is that prior to this NAR settlement, there was an assumption that the seller would provide the funds to compensate the buyer's agent, that the buyer was not responsible. That was the assumption. I want to make sure that we have a clear understanding that that is no longer the case. Literally, make sure you understand that when the buyer executes the buyer's brokerage agreement, you start from a place of the buyer being responsible for the seller's, your compensation. That's point one. That's your starting point. You start from a place of the buyer being responsible to pay the agreed upon compensation. If you go out, you identify a property, you negotiate with the owner, the seller, or the agent, that there will be a contribution to your compensation, or they are offering compensation, great. Now they've covered potentially all of what the buyer has agreed to compensate you. But without that agreement, without that compensation agreement signed, that's another conversation. We're going to lean more into that even next week. Without that being signed, we are in a place where your buyer is going to be responsible for that compensation. We must understand that. We must understand that. We got to wash our heads of this idea that, oh, don't worry about it, buyer. That used to be the marketing, right? It's free to work with me. No, it's not. Technically, it never was free to work with you, right? But now it's more and more apparent that it is not free to engage your representation, right? And so again, that goes to point two. Buyers must understand who is responsible for paying their compensation and why. They're responsible until we identify a property where a seller or a seller's agent has agreed to provide your compensation or some type of concession that's going to cover your compensation. Buyer's responsible. Okay, so we got to appreciate that. So we know that NAR implemented changes to their commission rules known as the participation rules. These regulations, we know, prohibit sellers from making offers of compensation in their MLSs. I want to hit this. Just because they cannot disclose or offer compensation in an MLS does not mean that that cannot be promoted in an email, on a sign outside the property, through a text blast, right? Right? So make sure we understand that. They simply cannot make that offer of compensation in the MLSs. It can be anywhere else, and it's compliant. It cannot be, however, there cannot be a link from the MLS that points them to a website, right? Or that points them to a sign. No, there can be no connection between the MLS and whatever source is disclosing the offer of compensation. Okay? Right. And then thirdly, we know that the other part of the most important part of the settlement for you guys is that the buyer must now sign a buyer's brokerage agreement. You must have this signed with every client in residential purchase transactions, right? We know this is for residential transactions, not for commercial, right? We know that this is for residential transactions. And we know that this must be executed before showing property both virtually and in person. Full stop. So no longer are we just jumping in the car, meeting someone. Well, you can meet them, but I hope you have either your buyer's brokerage agreement printed out or you're ready to do some type of DocuSign, because you cannot show that property without the buyer's brokerage agreement being executed. Make sure that's clear. Now, here's the inventory of buyer's brokerage agreements that are available in Florida as of today from your document portal, or inventory. So if you're with Form Simplicity or your brokerage has one, here are the main ones that you're going to see: your transaction broker, exclusive buyer brokerage agreement, highlight transaction broker, right? Single agent, exclusive buyer brokerage agreement, exclusive buyer brokerage agreement with consent to transition to transaction brokerage relationship, your no agency relationship, exclusive buyer brokerage agreement, your modification to exclusive buyer brokerage agreement, your showing agreement, and then your property pre-touring agreement. So what we've done, we've tried to pretty much kind of go from your most all-encompassing agreement to your least encompassing agreement, right? Going from your transaction broker, exclusive buyer's brokerage agreement, all the way down to property pre-touring agreement, where you're just showing a particular property, okay? Again, for those of you that are coming in, there's a link in the chat to a handout. So let's look at the agreements that are in your inventory. Starting first with the transaction broker exclusive buyer brokerage agreement. Now, on the screen, you're going to see a quick screenshot of the first page of these documents, but in the handout is the full agreement, right? And as an aside, in the handout, as I just checked, if you guys actually have an extra agreement, the listing agreement, disregard that. Look at the buyer's brokerage agreements, okay? So let's talk about the transaction broker exclusive buyer brokerage agreement. Now, one concept in the exclusive buyer, the three forms of exclusive buyer brokerage agreement that I want to point out. This language here, exclusive buyer brokerage agreement, exclusive buyer brokerage agreement. And the reason why I point this out is because this agreement is drafted so that the buyer is required to exclusively work with you for their purchase, rent, or otherwise acquisition of a property. Does that make sense? So they're exclusively bound to you, where you see this language, exclusive buyer brokerage agreement. However, transaction broker talks about your responsibility to them. Transaction broker means I can work with both you, buyer, and potentially the seller in the same transaction. Transaction broker exclusive buyer brokerage agreement, right? It's a legally binding contract between the brokerage and the buyer establishing a transactional brokerage relationship. Again, meaning I can represent both parties on one transaction. All of these agreements define the terms under which your compensation, you'll be compensated, and the buyer's obligations to you, and also the duration of your relationship. Under this agreement, this is what's unique to this agreement, outside of you being able to represent both a buyer and a seller in one transaction, the brokerage provides limited representation to the buyer, facilitating the transaction. So you're saying I'm a fiduciary for the transaction. I'm not a fiduciary for the seller, not a fiduciary for the buyer. I'm a fiduciary for the transaction. I want to make sure that both you, buyer and seller, you make your way to the closing table to facilitate the purchase and sale of this property, okay? Unlike single agency, which we're going to look at next, a transaction broker does not owe fiduciary duties such as loyalty, full disclosure, but must exercise honesty, limited confidentiality, reasonable skill, and care, okay? So you think of this as being a neutral in the transaction. Think of this as being a neutral. As the realtor, you're a neutral. The buyer cannot work with anyone else, but you are neutral and you can work with a seller in the same transaction. Also, it provides that you can work with multiple buyers who may be interested in the same property that you're showing this buyer. I'm a neutral. Okay? So make sure you have this in your arsenal. And for all intents and purposes, this is likely going to be the most common agreement that you're going to use. So make sure you have this one. You're very tight on how to explain this form of buyer brokerage agreement. This is going to be the one that you most commonly utilize. Okay? Now, I've had some agents say, I feel icky. I don't like that representing both parties. I just feel like it's too sticky, potential to, okay, fine, so be it. If you know for sure that you're never going to seek to represent your buyer and the seller in the same transaction, fine. Utilize the single agent exclusive buyer brokerage agreement. The single agent exclusive buyer brokerage agreement. Now, what is different in this? Again, under this agreement, you act as a single agent, meaning that you owe the buyer the highest level of representation, including loyalty, confidentiality, full disclosure. Remember, in the transaction, you do not owe the buyer or seller full disclosure. I had a great question at Avenir about what does that look like. So full disclosure means you represent both parties. You know that the seller has a job offer that they were initially going to be remote, but now they must be in person. It's a federal government, it's a federal job, right? We know that everybody must report now. And so we know that they must be in Michigan in person by the end of the month, right? And this is a hard deadline. So they need a quick close. They need to close in 2 weeks, right? And you represent the buyer. You're in a tough negotiation about purchase price. And the buyer says, I mean, what can I do? How much room do we have on price? You can say, as a transaction broker, you can say to the buyer, and they're motivated. I know they're motivated. Make them an offer for a quick close, and we'll likely be able to get some movement on this, right? That's a transaction broker. You cannot say, well, they got to be in Michigan by the end of the month, so lowball them, right? No, you're a transaction broker, but as a single agent, if you get a hold of that information, full disclosure, Paul, they got to be in Michigan by the 21st. Let's squeeze them, right? I'm a single agent. I don't owe that seller anything, right? That's the difference between single agent and transaction broker, right? And says, what if I represent the seller as a listing agent? You are going to, in that case, you're going to have to be a transaction broker, right? You're going to have to be a transaction broker because you would not be able to, you would not be providing full disclosure to your buyer, number one. Number two, you have to have that buyer agree to for you to represent both. Does that make sense, Anne-Marie? This is relevant when you are representing both parties. Good. That's a very good question, though. It's a very good question. You got to think through it, right? So if you have the listing and you have a buyer, you got to be a transaction broker. You have to. Because if you go single, then you're not meeting you're a full fiduciary for that buyer at that point. Okay. The next one that you have in your handout packet is the exclusive buyer brokerage agreement with consent to transition to transaction brokerage relationship. So this is when you have a situation where you're starting out as a single agent and you have consent from the buyer to transition to transaction, right? So we started out, Say that again. We started out as a single agent. However, let's use Anne-Marie. Anne-Marie got a listing since she started working with the buyer. She represents Kim, right? Anne-Marie gets a listing since she signed her agreement with Kim that Kim is interested in, right? Kim might be interested in. So what do we need to do? We need to transition that relationship with Kim to transaction brokerage, because Anne-Marie is representing both buyer and seller. Got it? Got to think through it, think through it, think through it. Okay. All right, perfect. So this transaction typically occurs when the brokerage is involved in the transaction where it represents both buyer and seller, requiring a shift to a neutral position. You got to shift to a neutral position. So first I was Kim's girl. Kim, I'm gonna tell you everything. Everything. Whatever I hear, I'm telling you. Kim says, Marie Cole, you have a listing. Oh, wait, Kim, now wait a minute, Kim. Can't tell you everything on that one, right? Got to go neutral. I'll tell you what you need to know. Can't tell you everything that I know, right? So that's how you transition over to that position. No agency relationship, exclusive buyer brokerage agreement. Now this one, you're rarely going to use this one, because this one is like, hey, under this agreement, you do not act as an agent for the buyer. You do not owe a financial fiduciary duty. You're just required to perform limited duties, including honest and fair dealing, full disclosure of known facts that materially affect the property value, and accounting all funds. This agreement clarifies that the buyer is not receiving full representation, but still outlines the terms of the brokerage services and compensation. Again, very rare will you use this if the buyer understands what they're signing. This is like, hey, I'm very loosey-goosey. Like, I don't owe you anything but to be a professional, right? I don't necessarily have to do what's in your best interest, right? I can't do anything that's illegal. I can't do anything that's unethical. I can't do anything that is, what do we call it? I don't want to use the word tortious. That's such an attorney word. Neglect, right? I cannot be neglectful in delivering my services to you, but I'm super easy breezy, right? Again, this is not one that you would commonly use. Now, one thing I want to point out is, notwithstanding the fact that you're very loose in your obligation to this buyer, they're still 100% exclusively committed to you. All 4 of these agreements still keeps this buyer exclusively obligated to work with you. All right? Exclusively obligated. And one thing I want to point out, and we go over this when we go over the exclusive buyer's brokerage agreement in detail. When we say exclusive buyer brokerage agreement, guys, I want to clarify how wide-reaching this is, how broad this agreement is as it relates to you. With an exclusive buyer brokerage agreement, from the time your buyer executes that agreement until the time that you guys agree that it ends, including a protection period thereafter, any property, however the buyer becomes aware of it, it can be an open house, it can be a grand opening, it can be a new construction community, they're obligated to work with you to facilitate that purchase. That's huge. They're driving. Marjorie's driving. She drives and she's like, oh my God, Avenir, it's beautiful. Yes, it is, Marjorie. If you're interested in purchasing, you need to call me because we have a buyer's brokerage agreement, right? And so this is a very broad protection of you as a real estate professional. Okay, so now modification to the exclusive buyer's brokerage agreement. What are we modifying? And this has a lot of kind of form instances and when you would change your buyer's brokerage agreement. So maybe you are changing the termination date. You're extending it, right? Are you changing the compensation for some reason? Are you changing the protection period? Are you adding a cancellation fee? Are you making sure that are you conditionally terminating the agreement and agreeing that the buyer will pay a cancellation fee, right? How many of you have attended the class where you've actually have anybody not attended the class? That's probably the easier one. Has anyone not attended the class where you've gone over the exclusive buyer brokerage agreement, all pages of it? Anybody? All right, we don't have a taker. Great. So, Melvin, of course you have it. You're the closer. That's a good place to be, because this allows me in this conversation to highlight, just remind you of what you learned when you reviewed that buyer's brokerage agreement. Okay. So one of the things that is in your buyer's brokerage agreement, some of the nuggets, you know that you have the ability to charge a retainer fee, right? You know that they have put more teeth around the conditional termination. I want to make sure I point this out. Conditional termination, you say, you know what, Monique, this is just not working. I've shown you 55 properties in 5 days. I just don't know that I just don't know. I mean, I've not slept, I've done 25-hour days with you, right? Oh, you're right. We should go ahead and terminate this agreement. You terminate the agreement, and lo and behold, the next day, Monique is interested in purchasing property number 26. We're not doing that. You're entitled to compensation, right? So that is a provision in your buyer's brokerage agreement that the association put more teeth on, right? So I just wanted to point that out. I don't want that to go over anybody's head. I want you to make sure that you understand all of the benefits that are in that exclusive buyer's brokerage agreement, okay? So that's the modification. Now, in your minds, I want you to make a clear understanding that you are pivoting these next agreements. We are pivoting from exclusive buyer brokerage agreement world, where you're covered. Anything that buyer, any property that buyer looks at during the time period of your representation, you will be compensated for that. Okay, that's the world we were just in. These next agreements, we are out of that world. The only properties that you'll be compensated for are the properties that the buyer specifically agrees to in these upcoming agreements. Yes, yes? All right. So the showing agreement. The showing agreement is still a contract between the brokerage and the buyer that grants the buyer access to view specific properties. You see this section here? You're going to lay out properties. So the buyer, for whatever reason, they've watched CNN, they're sophisticated. I don't know. They got a hold of this recording and said, I heard Ray Cole when she said that if I sign the exclusive buyer's brokerage agreement, even if I attend an open house, I got to pay you. I want the showing agreement. No, Paul, I have 5 properties that I want to see. Thank you. Place them there. Let's go see them. And then maybe I'll call you back if I want to continue to work with you after that. That's what this agreement is saying. Okay. So you still have protections. It's still out. It's still laying out that you'll be compensated, what you'll be compensated, what the fee will be. It still has that. It still says that they must work with you exclusively to purchase those 5 properties, but this is limiting the buyer's responsibility to just those 5 properties. Not anything in the universe that they could potentially buy during the time that they've agreed that you are their buyer's representation. Okay, so this is the showing agreement. You may decide that you are not sure whether or not you want to continue to work with this buyer in perpetuity or for a certain amount of time. You may say, okay, I'll just show you these 5 and that's it. So again, similarly, whereas a buyer may somehow know that this is an option, you may determine that this is what you want to use. So this is the showing agreement. The property pre-touring agreement. Again, this is one, they saw property, on Zillow, you bought that area code, zip code, they called you. No, I don't know that I want to continue to work with you, Gina. I just want to see this property. Albert, I just want to see this one property. Like literally, if it's not this one, I'm not buying. Right? And it's a $4 million property. And Albert, you don't want to stress them out, making them sign an exclusive buyer's brokerage agreement if they know that this is a property that they're interested in, and if they don't purchase this, they're not purchasing anything. You say, fine, I'll property pre-touring agreement. Right? So we've gone from transaction broker, exclusive buyer brokerage agreement, again, the highest level of I guess, ability for you to represent a buyer and a seller, all the way down to just a property pre-touring agreement, one specific property. We've gone to anything that you see and you're interested in, buyer, during this time of representation, all the way down to here's this one property that we're going to go see on Saturday at 2 o'clock. And if you buy it, wonderful. If you don't, keep my number, right? That's the property pre-touring agreement. Now, we hit on this before. Want to make sure that we reiterate this, because I don't want to assume that anyone knows this. When are we going to get this buyer's brokerage agreement executed? Of course, the best time is during your buyer consultation. Now, one of the things that I found to be beneficial with this rule is that it caused realtors to really put a framework around their buyer consultation. I call it a meeting of the minds. Before, I used to just get a call. Hey, I saw this property on Zillow. Can you meet me? Can you show me? And you kind of just running. And you really have not taken the time to do your own due diligence as to the viability of this buyer, right? Albert, you're making a decision between whether you want to just stay home and rest, if that's the case, or jump up and run out and show a property, right? So this requirement that a buyer's brokerage agreement be executed, I believe, is really putting a professional air around this interaction with buyers now, right? Let's have a conversation. Let's have a consultation, a meeting of the minds. Now, it doesn't have to be long. I would encourage you to have it so dialed in that it isn't long. Your buyer's consultation, similar to your listing presentation with a seller, really, it should be a script. You should already know what your points are. And you should already kind of, keep in mind questions that you've been asked. But you should have a flow as to how you present yourself, how do you present your value proposition, how do you present your experience, how do you present that you're the best person for them to work with as it relates to this particular transaction, and then how do they get to hire you? They get to hire you, right? They get to hire you. And here's how they get to hire you: by executing your professional agreement, okay? So it's best if this is done during your consultation. Notwithstanding that, if you don't do it then, you definitely must show, it is required that you have it signed before you show property, both virtually and in person. You gotta get it signed. If you don't, you're in violation. You're in violation of the rules, okay? Now, handling objections. Having the inventory of buyer brokerage agreements down pat, knowing in your head which ones you want to use for when, that's the easy part, right? You guys are going to have that committed to memory by the time you go to bed tonight, because you got them all now listed in this discussion, as well as you have them in your handout. That's going to be the easy part. Where you're going to have to continue to hone your craft is having a discussion around, number one, how to present them. Number two, number 1A, when we're talking about how to present them, how to describe or how to explain the terms in the agreement. Of course, without giving legal advice, right? Here we are with that again, right? So you're going to have to hone how to present the agreements. The agreements, you guys have it. I mean, there are a lot of pages. How many pages is this exclusive buyer brokerage agreement? It is 3 pages. But it's 3 pages, not even single space, if you ask me, right? So it's a lot of information, and a serious buyer takes signing their name on a document seriously, right? A serious buyer takes signing their name on a document, an agreement, seriously. And so for that reason, you're going to have to be able to present, again, the terms of the agreement in a professional manner, all right? So two of the main objections you're going to get, why should I sign this and why do I have to pay you? So you should be prepared. The last thing we're going to talk about, you want to make sure that you refine an objection handling framework. Everything, guys, do you know everything is a script? Everything is a script. Or at least the most impactful conversations are scripted. You're prepared. You already know how you're going to answer a question, right? So I want to leave you guys with a 4-part framework when you get these objections. They're not questions. You can tell there's a question is one thing because I don't know the information. An objection is I don't want to perform a particular action that you're encouraging that I take, right? So the first thing, you want to acknowledge it, validate their concerns, acknowledge their question or their concern. They're asking a question, but you can see there's actually a concern in there, right? You want to align. You want to make sure that you align with them. I can relate to that question. I can relate to that concern. Then you want to answer their question. Answer their question and then ask them a question to move them forward, right? You're going to move them off of that point by asking them a question. So here's an example. Let's use the why should I sign this? Why should I sign this, Kim? I mean, this is the first. I bought a house 3 years ago and the only thing I signed was the contract and then at the closing table. So what is this, Kim, that you're talking about? That's a great question, Ray Cole. I completely understand wanting to know what you're signing, acknowledging it. Align. Most buyers I work with have never signed a formal agreement with an agent before, so it can feel new, right? First, when you get this question, this is the first thing you got to say. And you can add to this as you deem fit. First, this is now a nationwide requirement for realtors who are members of the National Association of Realtors. It is not optional. And I would add a little commentary. If you have spoken with a realtor who is offered to show you properties and they haven't requested that you sign an agreement, ask them why. Because this is a requirement now, right? This isn't just your thing. This is a requirement, right? Second, this agreement simply outlines how I'll work for you, representing your best interests, negotiating on your behalf, and making sure you get the right home at the right price. It also spells out how I'm compensated and what you can expect from me as your fiduciary, right? What you can expect from me as your realtor. After hitting in the ask, let's move them off that concern. After I walk you through the key points, Kim's question, look at that. Will you ask any questions that you still have to ensure that you can feel totally comfortable with the agreement? So Kim's question in the chat, which is good because she went right into the ask. Or Kim's question, what will be the main points you will point out in the agreement when presenting? But first of all, I would present to them, it's an exclusive buyer brokerage agreement. When it starts and when it ends, and that during this time period, I'm the professional that is going to facilitate your acquisition. Acquisition can be rent or lease or an option. That's even in there, option. And then it even goes on to say any type of interest in real property. During that time period, they need to work with you. That's the first thing. Second of all, of course, the elephant in the room, how much you're going to be paid. How much you're going to be paid. Third, that they are responsible for paying it. That until you guys identify a property where the seller has agreed to either compensate you as a buyer's agent, make some type of contribution or concessions towards the purchase price that will cover your compensation. Until that happens, hey, buyer, you're responsible. Now, with that being said, because I understand that with your direction, I can only show you properties. I can make sure that we not proceed with going under contract on any properties where the seller has not agreed to provide compensation or some form of concession that'll cover my compensation, right? So you always want to put that out there. You always want to say, this is where we start, but this is where we can end, right? Which leads me to the next common objection. Why do I have to pay you? Acknowledge. That's a really important question, and I'm glad you asked. Align with recent industry changes. Buyers are hearing more about agent compensation than ever before. It can definitely feel confusing, right? Align with their concerns. It can feel confusing. Here's the answer why. This agreement ensures that we're upfront about how I'm compensated. In many cases, sellers still offer compensation. We'll have that conversation in advance and explore all options, including negotiating seller paid commission or building it into your offer. You'll never be surprised. Does that sound good? You'll never be surprised. We'll make sure that you'll never be surprised with finding out that you're responsible for paying my compensation. Would you be open to me showing you some examples of how this has worked for other buyers recently? That's an easy one, right? For those of you who have done closings, since we've had this buyer's brokerage agreement, you'll be able to show and been compensated by a seller, which that's most common, right? You'll be able to show them in this transaction, my compensation was 3%. The seller was offering 3%. In this transaction, my compensation was, 2.5%. The seller offered 2.5%. My buyer did not have to bring $1 to the table as it relates to my compensation. So this is going to be good as you guys get. And if you have not done a deal yet, reach back into your brokerage and show my colleague, here's what it looks like, right? So that's that framework. So bonus tips: emphasize your value over the cost. Reinforce your expertise and service before talking money. Remember, this is why the consultation framework is great. You want to have a framework where you talk about how great you are, so that by the time we get to signing this compensation agreement, where you indicate how much it costs to work with you, they're like, where do I sign? You're amazing. You're amazing, right? This agreement, just like hiring a lawyer or financial advisor, documents the terms of my professional representation. You can't work with a lawyer without executing a retainer. You wouldn't work with a financial advisor without signing a retainer. This is essentially the equivalent of my retainer, right? My role is to help you avoid costly mistakes and negotiate the best deal possible, right? Maybe you can point out some costly mistakes that people have made by trying to represent themselves. That's not hard, right? Lastly, I'm here to protect your time, your money, and your peace of mind. Your time, your money, and your peace of mind. When it comes to time, how much time would it take for them to figure out if they were to try and represent themselves? How much time would it take for them to figure out if they really got it right, this transaction process, right? How do they know whether or not they're making the appropriate offer, or they're paid too much, right? Or they're paying too little, or you're looking at the wrong property, so you're about to spend a ton of money on inspections when you shouldn't even start there, right? So these are all the ways that you talk about, all the ways that you're going to save them money, right? So that when they realize it's a wash, like if I have to compensate them, right? And then of course their peace of mind. Work with a professional so you're not questioning whether or not you're getting this right. So action steps. The handout. Be sure to print the handout. Throughout this next 3, there are going to be 3 more handouts. You guys, by the time we finish up, you should have a nice binder, right? You should have a nice binder with your agreements, your contracts, your riders, your compensation agreements, and your buyer brokerage agreements, so that you can reference them. You can mark them up. You can highlight. You can tab. Like Kim said, you'll have a marked up version where you highlight what's important for the buyer to know, right? And to be clear on. Second, you got to make sure that you practice presenting the terms of each agreement. Grab a partner, grab your parent, grab a spouse, grab a friend, and say, I'm going to go over this buyer's brokerage agreement with you. Ask me any questions that you have. right? Lastly, you definitely want to role play the objection handling. No matter how nice your buyer is, they're going to have questions, right? They're going to have questions, and they may be a little bit more stern with their questions than others. So you want to be prepared. And again, the more practice you get, the more objections you'll get, and the more objections you'll get, the more you'll have in your repertoire, your inventory, right, to be ready for that. All right. So lastly, for those of you who have not already joined the Academy, again, these courses are going to be hosted and taught through our Academy. Make sure that you're on the list. We are going to have an offline, outside of these Thursdays, we're going to have a group that comes together. We're going to dig deeper into training realtors on how to turn more clients into homeowners, okay? So make sure that you keep an eye on your email for that. Questions. I see your question in the chat, Sophia. If a buyer wants me to only show property where compensation is being offered, should I get that in writing through an email and addendum, or is that not necessary? You absolutely want to write that in on the addendum, Sophia. Absolutely. Buyer requests that only properties that the seller is offering compensation or concessions to cover commission be shown. And that's not uncommon. That's a very good question. All right. What other questions do we have? What other questions? Any other questions? You're welcome. All right. I think we got it. Clear as mud, right? All right, guys, you guys have been great. Again, make sure that you have the handout. Make sure that you take your, go there, Albert, to Purchase Ready Webinars and sign up. PurchaseReadyWebinars.com. Okay. Make sure you're signed up there. If you're signed up there, here's the link to the I'm going to drop this link to the handout again in the chat. If you do not have it, you're welcome. All right. You're welcome. All right, guys, for those of you who got it, got it good. I'll see you guys next week. For those of you who still need the handout, make sure that you check the chat. As soon as you put in your name and email address, a link showing the handout will come up. Email it to yourself, download it. Make sure you get it, okay? Hey, Vanya. All right, guys, you guys are welcome. See you later. Have a great day. See you next Thursday. Beatrice, go to